Yeah.
Who the hell you had with?
Listen, if you really know the background of who Jay Wright is, I'm really a criminal trying not to be one. I'm so honest about it. Like I've been arrested for 26 violent felonies.
Oh my God.
All violent.
Who are you fighting?
Everyone. I love to fight. It's my favorite thing to do. That is my problem. And I'm one of those people that really stand on what I believe in.
Light-skinned person, because they
no, I'm
don't
not.
be trying to get dirty.
Listen, I am light-skinned with dark-skinned tendencies.
Okay, I got you.
I don't act nothing like anybody else that look like me. I like to fight. I do all bad things on accident, but it's because I stand for...
1 month before Mother's Day 2021, a man sat in front of a camera and said this: "I'm really a criminal trying not to be one. I've been arrested for 26 violent felonies. All violent. I love to fight. It's my favorite thing to do. That is my problem." Nobody stopped him. Nobody warned the people around him. The interview aired. Life continued. And 1 month later, on Mother's Day morning, a 20-year-old woman named Wilanna Bibbs, Wana, was at her boyfriend's mother's house in Davenport, Iowa. She picked up her phone and called her mother. 4 times. Back to back to back to back. Her mother was at work and missed every single one. So Wana left a text message instead. "Hey Ma, happy Mother's Day. I love you and appreciate you for everything you do. Love, bud. Call me." By the time her mother called back, Wana was already gone. Taken by that same boyfriend. The man from the interview. Justin Wright. A multi-platinum songwriter who had worked alongside some of the biggest names in hip-hop. And reportedly, the argument that set everything in motion that afternoon was over $70. But here is what the headlines missed. Because the $70 is not even the most disturbing part of this story. The person who introduced Wana to Justin Wright in the first place was supposed to be her best friend. A woman named Ann, who had Justin's child and who had been in his world long before Wana ever was. And what Ann has since said publicly about what was really happening inside that apartment, what Wana knew, what she did not know, and what all three of them were to each other, is the part of this case that a courtroom conviction alone could never fully answer. This is the story of Wilanna Bibbs. And by the time we are done, you will understand exactly how a 20-year-old woman with everything ahead of her ended up in that house on Mother's Day, and why the man who took her life had already told the whole world what he was capable of. Wana deserved better. And her story deserves to be told fully. If that matters to you, subscribe and turn on your notifications before we go any further. Because this is only the beginning. Let us start with Wana. Wilanna Simone Bibbs was born on September 11, 2000 in Durham, North Carolina. She went by Wana. And by the time she was 20 years old, she had already done something that most people her age only talk about. She packed up and moved to Atlanta, Georgia to chase a singing career she had been carrying since she was young. But Wana was not the kind of person who put everything on hold while she waited for one thing to work. While she was building toward music, she launched her own mink lash business called Lashed by Willie. She started a clothing line. She worked multiple jobs at the same time, KFC, an airport, a place called Daddy-O. Not because she had no options, but because she was building something from the ground up and she was not going to slow down until it was real. Above all, she loved to sing and wanted to make a life for herself in the music industry.
Yeah.
Who the hell you had with?
Listen, if you really know the background of who Jay Wright is, I'm really a criminal trying not to be one. I'm so honest about it.
Her mother Cassandra described her as someone who was always very forgiving. Someone who never held anything against anyone. Always smiling. The kind of person who made the people around her feel like they mattered just by being in the room. Now here is why that matters, and it is not just because it is a nice thing to say about someone who is gone. Because when you understand that Wana was genuinely that kind of person, trusting, forgiving, loyal to the people she loved, the choices she made in the months before Mother's Day start to make a very different kind of sense. She was not naive. She was generous. And in the world she had stepped into in Atlanta, those two qualities placed her in a situation she could not have fully seen coming. Now let us talk about Justin Wright. Because you heard his words at the beginning of this video. But you need the full picture of who this man was before you can understand how Wana ended up in a room with him. Justin Lamont Wright went by Jay Wright in the music industry. He was 31 years old at the time of Wana's death. He was based in Atlanta and he had built real, documented credibility in the music business. His company, Camp Entertainment Worldwide, which he founded in 2011, had worked alongside Future, 21 Savage, Timbaland, Rick Ross, Gucci Mane, DJ Khaled, Bow Wow and Nipsey Hussle, and major companies including VH1, Sony Entertainment, and Lionsgate. Multi-platinum credits. Real industry connections. From the outside, he looked exactly like the kind of person a young woman trying to build a singing career in Atlanta would want to know. But here is what you need to understand about Justin Wright. He was not hiding the other side of himself. 1 month before Mother's Day, he sat down for a public interview on the Post Up Show with M.O. Clark and said it himself, on camera for anyone to find. 26 violent felony arrests. All violent. He said fighting was his favorite thing. He stood on it regardless of the consequences. Now think about what that means for a second. This was not something investigators uncovered after the fact. This was not something prosecutors had to dig for in old records. This man sat in front of a camera and volunteered that information publicly. And the people around him, including Wana, did not have the full picture of what that actually meant until it was far too late. Now here is where this story gets layered. Because the person who brought Wana into Justin's world was not a random connection at a music event. It was someone Wana considered a close friend. A woman named Anne who had been involved with Justin since she was 17 years old and who had a daughter with him named Jayla. And has spoken publicly across multiple statements about what she says her time with Justin actually looked like. The control, the manipulation, the things she says she endured before she found a way out. Her account is hers and it is part of a documented pattern around Justin Wright that existed long before Wana ever entered the picture. Wana and Anne had become genuinely close in Atlanta through mutual connections. They traveled together. They showed up for each other. According to Anne's own account, it was Jayla's second birthday that first put Wana and Justin in the same room. And needed someone to do Jayla's hair and she reached out to Wana. That was the introduction. And what started as a friendship between two young women trying to build something in Atlanta became something that nobody on the outside could fully see until it was too late. Now Wana's family has been clear about their position on this, and you need to hear it. Their view is that Wana was a young woman who got pulled into a situation she did not fully understand. That she trusted the wrong people. And that what happened to her on Mother's Day is the direct result of a man whose pattern of behavior was documented in public, and whose world she should never have been introduced to. That position is on record. It is their daughter's story and they have the right to tell it the way they lived it. Now here is a detail that Wana's family has never been able to fully process. Wana's mother Cassandra had purchased a plane ticket for Wana to come home to Durham for Mother's Day weekend. She wanted her daughter back home. But Justin's mother, Mamie Williamson, intervened and convinced Wana to stay in Davenport, Iowa instead for a family visit. According to a family member, Wright's mother bought Wana a ticket to come back to her son. That one decision, staying in Davenport instead of going home to her mother where she was supposed to be, put Wana in a house on Calvin Street on Mother's Day morning. Wana's father Thomas Bibbs reached out that morning. He had heard something from someone in North Carolina, another incident involving Justin and Wana, and while he said he did not want to get into the details, he had one specific concern. His daughter had not responded to his messages all day. He did not know where she was. He needed to know she was safe. He did not get the answer he needed. Minutes before she was killed, Wana called her close friend Kylan Adams. She was crying and it sounded like she was running. And she told Kylan that Justin was going to kill her. She knew. In those final minutes, Wana knew exactly what was coming. And she reached out to the person she trusted to hear it. At 1:25 in the afternoon on May 9, 2021, Davenport police responded to a disturbance call at 1503 Calvin Street. Officers arrived and found Wilanna Bibbs. She was pronounced deceased at the scene by Davenport Fire and Medic. Justin Lamont Wright was taken into custody. A cash-only bond was set at $500,000. Wana was 20 years old. She had a lash business, a clothing line, a voice she was working to build into something real, and a mother who was at work that morning missing 4 phone calls in a row from her daughter, for calls that came before that last text that said Happy Mother's Day and asked her to call back. By the time Cassandra called back, Wana was already gone. Now here is what happened when Justin Wright sat down with investigators that same afternoon. And what he said, and what he refused to say, tells you something important about what prosecutors were going to be walking into when this case eventually reached a courtroom. Because in Iowa, getting a first-degree murder conviction requires more than proving someone committed an act. It requires proving deliberate premeditation, that there was intent and forethought before the act itself. And Justin Wright's behavior in that interrogation room gave the prosecution significant material to work with. From the moment Justin Wright sat down across from that Davenport detective, something was off. And it was not subtle. He was not behaving like a man who had just lost someone he cared about. He was not asking questions. He was not showing any visible distress about Wana. He was not doing any of the things that people who are genuinely shocked and grieving do when they find themselves suddenly inside a police interrogation. What he was doing instead was talking. A lot. About everything except what had actually happened inside that house on Calvin Street. Now here is why that matters before we even get into the specific things he said. In Iowa, first-degree murder requires prosecutors to prove deliberate premeditation. That means they cannot simply show that something terrible happened. They have to show the jury that before it happened, there was a decision. There was intent. There was forethought. And one of the ways prosecutors build that argument is by looking at how a suspect behaves the moment they are brought in. What do they say? What do they avoid? What emotions show up and which ones are completely absent? Keep that standard in your mind as we go through this interrogation because it matters. From the very beginning of that conversation, Justin was already building a narrative. He talked about a family birthday party he had missed. He brought up relatives who were in the ICU. He described his PTSD. He laid out the reasons he had stayed in Davenport longer than originally planned. He talked about his complicated history with his mother. He painted himself throughout as someone who was overwhelmed, exhausted, and misunderstood. Someone who had nothing to do with what had happened in that house. Think about that for a second. Before the detective even got to the serious questions, Justin had already filled the room with explanations for why he was there, why things were complicated, and why none of it connected to him. That is not how innocent people typically move through an interrogation. Innocent people ask questions. They want to know what happened. They show emotion about the person who was found. Justin Wright did none of that. When the detective brought Wana up directly, Justin described her as Anne's friend. Someone he had briefly been involved with until he found out she was connected to Anne. He said their communication at that point was only through text messages. He said she had sent him money she owed him earlier that same morning, Mother's Day. And he said that if Wana was in Davenport, it had something to do with his mother. Not with him. Now stay with that last point because it is doing something specific. By positioning his mother as the reason Wana was in Davenport, Justin was creating distance between himself and the situation. He was redirecting the story. He was framing it as a family dynamic, something his mother did regularly, getting involved in his relationships, buying tickets, arranging visits, rather than a relationship he was actively in. And he was doing all of that calmly, methodically, across hours of conversation, without once breaking that composure to show anything real about the fact that Wana was dead. Not once. In all of those hours. Not once. The detective kept coming back to Wana. He kept asking Justin to describe her. Kept pressing on their last interaction. And each time, Justin's answers were careful and controlled. He talked about her like someone from a complicated chapter of his life. Not like someone he had been in love with. And then he said something that tells you exactly where his head was in that room. He told the detective that Wana and another person had all been part of a plan to have him killed. He said he had already reported it to police. He was not just redirecting toward his mother anymore. He was actively constructing an alternative story, one where he was the intended victim. Think about what that means. This man had just been brought in for questioning about a woman found dead in his mother's house. And his response was to tell the detective that she had been plotting against him. When the detective asked him directly whether he had ever been a gun person, Justin said no. He said he liked to fight. He said guns were never his thing. Now hold that statement alongside the public interview he had given 1 month earlier where he described 26 violent felony arrests and called fighting his favorite thing in the world. And hold it alongside the fact that Wilanna Bibbs was found deceased at that address. A man who said guns were never his thing. Sitting in an interrogation room. While his girlfriend lay dead at his mother's house. That contradiction did not go unnoticed. Scott County Attorney Kelly Cunningham confirmed that Wright and Bibbs were in Davenport visiting Wright's relatives when the shooting occurred. Wright was booked into Scott County Jail. When he appeared before a judge, he asked for a court-appointed attorney. He told the judge he had been living out of hotels and had nothing. The multi-platinum songwriter with the industry credits, the company he had built since 2011, the connections to Future and Timbaland and DJ Khaled, he was telling a judge he could not afford a lawyer. He entered a not guilty plea. Now while all of that was moving through the Iowa court system, the rest of the world was finding out what had happened to Wana. And the response was immediate. M.O. Clark, who had hosted the post-up interview with Justin, Wana, and in just 1 month earlier, posted publicly the day after Wana's death. She said she was devastated to learn that one of her recent guests had lost her life at 20 years old on Mother's Day. She described Wana as an artist from North Carolina who had just started working with her on makeup and accessory lines. And then she said something that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. She pointed out the painful reality that the same man who had brought Wana to her show and made the introduction was the same man now sitting in police custody. Mo Clark had sat across from all three of them in that interview. She had watched them interact. Nothing she saw that day gave her any reason to think that 1 month later she would be writing that post. Wana's family did not stay quiet. A family member posted directly, "You took her all the way to Iowa and harmed her on Mother's Day. You brainwashed and manipulated my cousin and tried to turn her against us. I hate that she loved you. I hate that she ever met you." Thomas Bibbs reached out to Justin's mother. He told her that her silence since the news broke made him believe she had helped her son. He told her he hoped Justin faced the full consequences for what he had done. Then something surfaced that added another layer to an already complicated story. After the case became public, and posted a video on social media talking about her own experience with Justin and what she says she went through during her time with him. In doing so, she included details about Wana and the period when all three of them were connected. Wana's family saw that video and responded immediately. Their position was clear. Wana was a young woman who had been pulled into a situation she did not fully understand, and using her name and her story publicly while she could no longer speak for herself was something they would not let pass without a response. Then an audio recording surfaced. Reportedly of Anne, in her own words, talking about why she made the introduction that brought Wana into Justin's world. In that recording and described the reasoning behind it. She talked about what the plan was supposed to be. She talked about her own circumstances at the time and what she was trying to accomplish. Now here is the honest thing to say about that audio. You can listen to it and walk away with very different conclusions depending on what you already believe about the people involved. Some people who followed this case accepted Anne's account entirely. Some stood fully with Wana's family's version. And some believed that the truth of what was really happening between all three of them in those months before Mother's Day was something that neither a recorded conversation nor a family statement could fully capture on its own. What the criminal case captured is this. Justin Wright was the one responsible for what happened to Wana inside that house on Calvin Street. That is what prosecutors argued. That is what they spent 2 years preparing to prove. And that is what a Scott County jury would eventually have to decide. A balloon release was held in Wana's honor shortly after her passing. An awareness march was organized in her name. Her funeral was held on May 22, 2021, at QA Cantrell Funeral Services in East Point, Georgia. A dove release was held that day. And in the days that followed, Wana's sister posted something that has stayed with everyone who followed this case closely. She wrote about how she had tried to warn Wana. How Wana would get frustrated with her for it but always knew the warnings came from love. She wrote, "Why would I want someone I love to go through something that they don't have to when I can see where the road will end?" That question does not have a clean answer. It never does in cases like this. But it is the question that sat at the center of everything. Not just for Wana's family but for everyone who had watched the warning signs and could not find a way to make them land before it was too late. Justin Wright sat in Scott County Jail for nearly 2 years before this case reached a courtroom. 2 years of Cassandra Bibbs waiting. 2 years of Thomas Bibbs carrying what he knew about that $70. 2 years of Wana's sister reading back what she had written after the funeral and sitting with the weight of what she had tried to say while Wana was still alive to hear it. The trial began on May 27, 2023, in Scott County District Court in Davenport, Iowa. And what happened inside that courtroom, the testimony, the jury's decision, and what Judge Tamara Roberts said before she handed down a sentence Justin Wright will carry for the rest of his life, is where this story ends. And it is the only answer a legal system is actually capable of giving to a family who lost their daughter on Mother's Day. The trial ran for 10 days. Remember what we mentioned earlier about deliberate premeditation? That is what the prosecutors spent 10 days putting in front of the jury. The testimony that landed hardest came from Khaled Adams. She was Wana's close friend, someone who described Wana as her best friend and like a sister to her. Khaled told the jury that Wana called her at 1:05 in the afternoon on Mother's Day and told her directly that Justin was going to kill her. 20 minutes after that call, Davenport police were responding to Calvin Street. Think about what that testimony does in a premeditation case. Wana told someone what was coming before it happened. That is not a spontaneous act. That is not a moment of uncontrolled rage that nobody could have predicted. That is a situation that Wana herself could feel building, and she picked up the phone and said it out loud to the person she trusted most. The prosecution used that call as one of the anchors of their entire argument. The defense had Justin's version of events. The version where Wana's presence in Davenport traced back to his mother. The version where he was the one being targeted. The version he had been carefully constructing since the moment he sat down with that detective on the afternoon she died. His attorney told the jury that the physical evidence would show other DNA on the weapon and that the witnesses would not be able to say directly what they saw. He asked the jury to hold the prosecution to their burden. The jury heard 10 days of testimony from both sides. They began deliberating and came back with their verdict after approximately 90 minutes. Guilty of first-degree murder. 90 minutes. After 10 days of trial and 2 years of waiting, 12 people reached a unanimous decision in less time than it takes to watch a film. That tells you something about how clearly the evidence read once it was all laid out in front of them. Sentencing was scheduled for June 14, 2023, before Judge Tamara Roberts. And before the judge spoke, the courtroom heard from the people who had lost the most. Several of Wana's family members gave victim impact statements. Some said they could not find it in themselves to forgive Justin Wright. Some said they hoped he could find a way to become a better person somewhere down the road. All of them were sitting across from the man who had taken Wana from them on the one morning of the year that was supposed to be about celebrating mothers, and they were trying to put words to something that does not have adequate words. Thomas Bibbs stood before that court and told them what he believed this came down to. $70. His daughter's life, taken over $70. That is the number that has stayed with everyone who followed this case from the beginning. Not because it explains anything, because it does not. But because it captures the full weight of what was lost and how little it was worth to the man who took it. Judge Tamara Roberts was clear about one thing before she imposed the sentence. The court had no discretion. Iowa's first-degree murder law carries a mandatory sentence. There was no range. No consideration of circumstances. No possibility of the judge choosing something lighter. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. Full stop. Justin Wright chose not to make a statement. He stood there while Wana's family spoke. He said nothing. And when it was over and officers moved to take him from the courtroom, his mother Mamie Williamson stood up from her seat and asked if she could say goodbye to her son. The deputy shook his head. And they walked Justin right out of that room. He filed an appeal with the Iowa Supreme Court after sentencing. His attorneys argued ineffective assistance of counsel, that the representation he received at trial was so flawed it constituted a structural error serious enough to get the case reheard. It is one of the most commonly attempted appeals in criminal cases. It is also one of the hardest to win because courts set an extremely high bar for what qualifies as representation deficient enough to have changed an outcome. The state argued against it. And on January 9, 2025, the Iowa Court of Appeals dismissed the appeal entirely. Every legal door Justin Wright had available to him is now closed behind him. He is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is not getting out. Now here is something that most coverage of this case moved past too quickly. While the courts were working through all of it, Cassandra Bibbs was not standing still. On what would have been Wana's 22nd birthday, September 11, 2022, Cassandra organized a public celebration of her daughter's life at Briar Creek Shopping Center in North Carolina. She brought people together not to mourn what happened, but to remember who Wana was. The lash business. The clothing line. The dream to become a music star that she had carried from Durham to Atlanta. The smile that everyone who knew her mentioned first. Think about what Cassandra carries every single year now. Mother's Day and September 11th. Two dates that should mean entirely different things than they do. One is the day she was at work missing 4 phone calls from her daughter. The other is the day she should be celebrating her. Both of them permanently changed by what Justin Wright did on a Sunday afternoon in Iowa. Justin Wright told the world who he was 1 month before he killed Wilanna Bibbs. He said it on camera. He was not whispering it. He volunteered it in a public interview that anyone could find and watch. And Wana, a 20-year-old woman from Durham, North Carolina, who had moved to Atlanta with a plan and a dream and a business she was building from nothing, did not have the full picture of what that confession actually meant until it was too late. Her family warned her. Her sister wrote about trying to warn her after the funeral. Her father was reaching out on the morning she died asking where she was. And Cassandra was at work on Mother's Day, missing 4 calls in a row from a daughter who left a text that said Happy Mother's Day and asked her to call back. The legal chapter of this case is fully closed. Justin Wright is in prison. The appeals are exhausted. But the question this case leaves behind is not closed. It lives in the gap between what was publicly known about Justin Wright and what the people around him were able to do with that knowledge before May 9, 2021. Wana Bibbs deserved every year that was taken from her that afternoon in Davenport. Remember her name. Wilanna Simone Bibbs. Wana. And if this story moved you the way it should have, share it before you go. Someone in your circle might need to see it. Subscribe and turn on your notifications because we cover every case like this from beginning to end.